Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank, who has been on a trip. Welcome back from Italy, Dave.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's good to be back. I appreciate also that you were able to hold things down while I was away, and the world keeps turning even though I take a little leave. So thank you.
Well, a lot has happened in the past week. Of course, huge news. This is actually the second indictment of Donald Trump, but this is arguably a lot more significant than the last one. This is, of course, Jack Smith has come down with a 44-page 37 count indictment of former President Donald Trump, with 31 counts of retaining classified documents without authorization, and then another 6 counts of obstruction, lying about having documents, trying to move documents away where they couldn't be retrieved, and possibly even witness tampering, though I'm not sure about that when I was looking for that. He is also his aide, Walt Nauta, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but is also being named as a co-conspirator. Only 1 count against him. Again, trying to move the documents. He was helping him to move the documents, I guess, before the raid. A lot to talk about here. He's not being charged at this point with disseminating classified documents, although in the indictment, in the complaint, there are accounts of him sharing classified documents, including an invasion plan of Iran, with a couple of his friends who are working on a Mark Meadows autobiography. And then another golf buddy who is apparently in one of his political action committees was privy to a map that was classified that he said, please don't get too close. So I don't know exactly what happened there. There were rumors that Kid Rock had access to it. I think that's been debunked. But anyways, we don't know exactly what's been happening, but there is a whole mystery around what documents were sent to Bedminster, if I'm saying that right, in New Jersey, and I'm not really clear on this, but there may be additional documents that have not been returned to the government. I'm not sure if they're classified. Anyways, it's been a circus. We're going to discuss a lot of different aspects of this. In our second segment, we'll discuss some of the Republican responses to it. The Democrats have been mostly quiet. We'll talk about that as well. But we'll talk about various Republican responses in the second segment. But there's so much to discuss here. This, of course, happened in Miami. There was a bit of a protest, not huge, no violence or incidents or anything like that. No cameras were allowed into the courtroom. There are some drawings of him in the courtroom done by people who do that. And he pled not guilty, promptly left and went to a fundraiser. And basically accused, Jack Smith and the DOJ of being corrupt, saying this is political, wanting him to not run. And he says he's going to run until the end. A lot to discuss and a lot to unpack here, Dave. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you for that great setup. You ended up hitting, key elements of it, of the indictment. I think it's worth kind of mentioning a couple details, just to kind of get a little bit more clarity about how to assess this. There have been legal analysts from across the political spectrum, as well as nonpartisan analysts, who have methodically gone through the indictment, because it is itself methodical. Mm-hmm. And it's basically describing how a person like President Trump, who felt that he could have whatever he wanted, how he wanted it, was not cooperative in the process of the National Archives um, retaining National Archives and Records Administration, retaining the documents that they were legally entitled to. So we're going to talk about the politics of it later on, but just to kind of differentiate this from any other case that is air quotes similar. It's a unique case because Trump apparently, his quotes that they're attributing to him in the indictment and communications between him and staff members, and then actions of those staff members, pretty clearly spell out how he was insinuating that maybe we should just ignore that request. Maybe these are mine. Maybe we should, not even look for the things that they're asking for, because if we look for some of them, we might find them. And then his lawyers were trying to help him stay compliant. And so there's evidence in this, there are, claims, I guess, not evidence. There are claims in this indictment that his lawyers were, in fact, trying to help him as best they could. And he was trying to stop them as best he could. And that's Walton Nada, aide, was sort of stuck in the middle of trying to serve Trump as best he could, but yet is kind of the weak link here because he created a crime by obstructing the FBI in its attempts to enforce this process. So this is a highly technical case that probably wouldn't have existed.
There are text messages that are included throughout the thing, and conversations that are referred to, some of which I would have assumed would have been confidential, but we've heard in the past that there was some sort of mole in there. We don't know who that was or what capacity that was, but I'm really going to wonder, want to learn exactly where some of this information came from, how they got these text messages, all of them, and how they got the recorded conversations. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
I mean, I know I'm speculating here because I know, like you said, we don't know. It still has to unfold, and it's going to unfold over arguably several years or more as this plays out in the appellate court and the Supreme Court. So that's not, we got to understand that this is not going to be part of the political election process. This is going to linger much longer. It's very likely that it will linger much longer. And we'll talk about that separately, of course. But I think it's important to say, like you called out that there's kind of a circus surrounding this too. And I think that that's an important piece of this, is that if we are talking about the indictment, we're trying to keep the blinders on. Outside of the document itself, there is the media circus, there's the political circus. We're going to soon have an election circus. So there are so many competing political forces around the conversations about this indictment. I really appreciate that you and I can kind of, we're going to comment on those forces, but we're not going to let that impact or affect how we look at the indictment.
Sure.
So one last detail I'd like to say here is that, again, to speculate, it's possible that the lawyers who were trying to do their job were trying to avoid crimes. And in one, I could picture somebody on the inside saying, hey, there's this thing going on here. We're trying to help. Like we got you 38 classified documents. There's a binder of them. We're going to turn them in, but we don't have access to everything. And we're just doing the best we can do. And I would suspect that there was some, whether it's DOJ, whether it's FBI, however this is playing out. And don't forget, the Secret Service is all around Trump too. So everywhere he goes, there's Secret Service people, and they have a unique role, but not a completely insular role. So there's just a lot of players on the field here, and Trump is behaving in a way that's not particularly rational so in other words, when we think rationally about what happened, it's not going to be that easy to recreate the wheel.
And we know what happens to text messages with the Secret Service. We've seen that already. I mean, I just want to read a few quotes. I mean, this is in May, when his lawyers are trying to say, look, let us go through the boxes to see if there are documents in response to the FBI subpoenas. And this is Trump saying to his attorneys, I don't want anybody looking. I don't want anybody looking through my boxes. I really don't. I don't want you looking through my boxes. And then B, well, what happens if we just don't respond at all or don't play ball with them? C, wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything here? D, well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? I mean, this is amazing stuff. This is,
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh no, I was sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was like an involuntary action. I just said it's absolutely amazing because it's, he has effectively admitted that he wanted to obstruct. He tried to obstruct, and I think that's what is laid out here is that like people like still to this day maybe will never know what all went to what hiding place and when, and maybe this is just enough. And then so we have to look at why is this important, and it's important I think because in part this is the guy who was the leader of the free world, and people don't like to talk out loud about this, but he might become the next leader of the free world again in a very short amount of time. So there are forces at work that are saying, it's not common that we prosecute for these things, but every crime has to be taken in its own merits. Basically, every event, every incident is assessed and judged on its own merits. So those quotes that you just read, those are like part of the reason that the attorney-client privilege is being suspended is because he was teasing out with his lawyers, can we commit these crimes? Can we commit these crimes? And they're like, we're not doing that. We're gonna do this on the up and up. But they didn't have the complete authority or control jurisdiction throughout, and then so that leads to the national security considerations. And sorry to keep talking here, but one last thing here is that there's people that are saying, well, the Presidential Records Act is not even being assessed and no espionage occurred. Why are we dealing with the Espionage Act? And it's because a couple of those, there's a couple small, features of the Espionage Act deal with classified information and the handling of classified information.
Yes.
And so it's not just that they were presidential documents, that there was somebody decided there was national security implications, and that it's been determined that the president isn't trustworthy enough to have those outside of his tenure.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, too, this is 793, if anybody wants to look up section or 793, it just happens to be in the espionage that retention of national security documents is in that. It makes it sound more intense that it's in the Espionage Act, but it passed through it. I mean, here is the conspiracy, and this is what takes in his co-conspirator. I mean, Paragraph 81, the manner and means of conspiracy. A, suggesting that Trump Attorney 1 falsely represent to the FBI and grand jury that Trump did not have documents called for by the May 11th subpoena. B, moving boxes of documents to conceal them from Trump Attorney 1, the FBI, and the grand jury. So he had a couple of honest attorneys, and this is why he's got such a high turnover. C, suggesting that Trump Attorney 1 hide or destroy documents called for by the May 11th subpoena. D, providing to the FBI and grand jury just some of the documents called for by the May 11th subpoena while Trump claimed he was cooperating fully. E, causing a false certification to be submitted to the FBI and grand jury representing that all documents with classification markings had been produced when in fact they had not. And F, making false and misleading statements to the FBI. You don't have to talk to the FBI, right? You can say nothing. But if you say something and it's deliberately false, you are in trouble for obstruction. It's not perjury if you're not under oath, but obstruction. You are not allowed to lie to obstruct in injustice. You can absolutely, quote unquote, obstruct if you're simply saying, I take the fifth, or even just, I don't want to talk to you. But you can't be lying to them. That is a crime.
And this is why he's facing over 500 years in jail, because the way they normally handle these the penalty phase of Espionage Act crimes. Not that it's that normal of a process, but from what analysts have said, they stack them up, and they don't do concurrent; they do consecutive. So he's facing a massive amount of jail time, and part of the reason I mention this is not because I expect him to do maybe even day one, but he's eligible for an awful lot of time, and he doesn't seem like the person who wants to do any time. But he also, it's in his interest to kick the can for years as if he can do it. So it's going to be a very expensive proposition to get him through the election season, and then in theory, depending on if he wins the presidency or not, if he could then either plea bargain or potentially have Congress change laws and Supreme Court declare the charges moot. That's his thread the needle.
There's also questions of whether he can be in jail at all, because he's guaranteed, as the ex-president, a lifetime of Secret Service protection. And they cannot, under the law, delegate that protection to the prison authority. So if he's in prison, they have to be in there with him. We're on uncharted territory. No ex-president has ever been charged of a felony or even a misdemeanor that might, it has not happened. I think that part of what happened too is that a deal was struck. Here was something that they cite in there in paragraph 91, a sworn certification executed by Trump Attorney 3. A diligent search was conducted of the boxes that were moved from White House to Florida. B, the search was conducted after receipt of the subpoena in order to locate any and all documents that are responsive to the subpoena. And C, any and all responsive documents accompany this certification. Why wasn't Trump Attorney 3 charged? Maybe because there's reasonable doubt as to whether Trump Attorney number 3 even knew that documents had been moved out of there, considering the early things we read about Trump trying to hide things from his own attorney at this point. So This is really bad. I mean, this is beyond, Trump's ego and being bad, and this is criminal behavior. Any of else, if you or I had done anything like this with if we had somehow fell into even like just a few of these documents, we wouldn't be out here. To be able to talk about it. We wouldn't be attending fundraisers. We'd be in jail. There would be a massive bail because they would assume that we're a flight risk. I guess they assume because he's rich that he's not a flight risk, that he's got so much to live for or whatever. This is, I don't even, white male privilege. This is millionaire or billionaire privilege. I mean, this guy should not be out on the street right now. And if he's got other documents there, why aren't there more raids? And it's just, and it's going to be interesting because it has to be a public trial. But what do they do when they have to reference materials that are classified? Right. And how was that entered in? Can they even show the judge those documents?
So I know we are very, very close to transitioning, but one thing that I think is an interesting element here, and we're gonna pick up on this more in the future, is that they had to pick documents that they could introduce. So there's a whole other set of documents that are not eligible to be part of the public trial, so they're not even part of the indictment.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to get pretty interesting, and again, I don't know why there isn't a lot more media discussion of some of these aspects of this. I mean, they should be going into this. Why isn't there more discussion and questions about the Bedminster documents? I saw a Talking Points memo asking about it, but there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of discussion. So anyway, we have to stop there, and we'll move on to the next segment.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
How do you view it?
Yeah, I confess. This morning I was blasé. I was okay. He had these documents. We knew it. We saw the pictures from Mar-a-Lago, and then when the indictment came out, I was like, oh, there's always another layer down with this guy. That when what shocked me in particular was the nuclear programs, our own vulnerabilities. He's sharing our Iran plans with buddies at a golf course, and I don't see those as documents. Those are human beings. Those are American lives. Those are people who are helping the United States around the world who were put at risk. Those are American soldiers and Marines and airmen and seamen who are put at risk. And so the lack of reverence, lack of sense of responsibility for the people who were serving under his command is just so offensive. And then just I had this thought, he's just a mean boy. He's like an 8-year-old boy. He wanted these documents for some willful reason, who could not admit error. And my friend Andrew Sullivan made the point today that whenever there's a situation where Donald Trump has to be equal with everybody, the rules have to apply equally, he will ride roughshod over that system and behave in a way so I'm not equal to everybody else. It's just me. The rules don't apply to me. And it's Greek in its exposure of his character flaws.
So this segment is about Republican responses. And they vary. They're across the board. What you just watched is David Brooks, who I consider to be one of the more enlightened Republicans, and is a very responsible response. It's and it gets to the point of this whole thing. Has Donald Trump put people in danger? Has anybody gotten access to these documents that might not be in the best interest of the country or operatives across the world? Has he put people in danger? Has he put we don't know. And it's not like any of the national security agencies can tell us, because that could just possibly aggravate the situation. How have other Republicans responded? I mean, well, let's go from good to bad. One presidential candidate, Asa Hutchinson, who I think would probably be the most likely to win in a general election, is probably the least likely to win the nomination, has said that he would not vote for Trump if he is convicted. I believe he's the only one who said that. Maybe Chris Christie has said that or implied that. But he and Chris Christie, I believe, are the only two candidates who are taking anything like a responsible position on this. And you have House Speaker, Majority Speaker McCarthy saying that this is weaponization of the Department of Justice. That is irresponsible. It's one thing for a Cro-Mag like Jim Jordan or somebody to say that, but for the Speaker of the House to say this it undermines the legal justice system. It undermines the process. It creates a very dangerous system in light of January 6th and other violence that has occurred. It is profoundly irresponsible. I consider him to be the worst, even though other people have said more inflammatory things. He had no right to say that. And I know he was just catering to the extreme people who are mad at him for selling them out, however they imagined it, with the debt ceiling deal, and because he can't control his caucus. But that's too bad. He should not have said that. This was dangerous. And I really think the Democrats and other Republicans should be piling on him for it. But Democrats are just trying not to say anything. The only person who said anything is Joe Biden, because he was asked about it at a press conference, and he said, I have nothing to do with this. I learned about the indictment through the news. But unfortunately, there's polls that were about 50% of the public, and so that's not just Trumpers, believe that this was politically motivated. So again, and not everybody, in fact, very few people are going to actually read the indictment. So then you've got the wishy-washy people like DeSantis, who are saying weaponization of that's their charm phrase, weaponization of the DOJ, but they won't say he's innocent. They want it both ways because they want to hedge their bets, because as this story develops, people are going to come to be aware of it. And just like earlier, the people who think that this was politically motivated, I think they're, as they start to learn more of the facts, and it'll trickle through. And I'll give him credit. Pompeo said this is ridiculous. He's put American servicemen in danger. Pompeo said this on Fox News. So it's going to get to people because people who watch Fox News, okay, maybe they've written Pompeo off for saying that, but he's, the list is increasing. Sununu said it's disqualifying. Hogan from Maryland, the former governor, said it's disqualifying. We're still in the moderate department there. Bolt says it's disqualifying. He's not exactly a moderate, but but he's sort of a national security type guy who's got the military. I hand it to you, Dave. But the Republicans. I think the Democrats need to step up on this, not make a political issue of it, but come down on people like McCarthy for saying what they're saying. The Republicans, Mitch McConnell saying nothing, absolutely saying nothing.
Yeah, thank you for the landscape, laying the land. You did a great job of setting up the stage here. And I alluded to this in the last segment, that when you get outside of the indictment itself, you get into the arena of the circus. And because we're talking about Republican reactions, we're focused on basically just one half of the circus. We're leaving aside, the other media outlets that sort of represent the White House, the president, Biden, Democrats, basically anybody from the center left and beyond to the left. Mm-hmm. So we're talking realistically with the Republican Party. We're talking center right all the way to the Pluto, out in the outer orbits of Republican right wing. That's a team, right? There's only two teams. So McCarthy has the unenviable job of trying to square the circle, so to speak, where we've been talking about ad nauseum this whole time, why Trump is still the number one, leading candidate. He's getting like 60% of the Republican tentative, projected Republican voters. DeSantis is in the low 20s if he stays above 20. Everybody else is single digits, not even close. So the realpolitik situation here applied domestically is that the party is Trump's party to lose still. So just the way social psychology works, he's the alpha in the party. I think that's the role that the spoiler role is the role that somebody like Governor Christie is trying to do here, where he's saying like, look, I can be brash, I can be authoritative, I could set the record straight, I could speak truth I could say the uncomfortable things. He's polling at like 5% or less, maybe not even 1% in some polls. He's probably never going to be president. I hate to just be so dismissive, but you're polling 1%, you probably aren't going to be president. But he's at least trying to crack the shell of respectability here, and so I think it's not just that it's politically motivated; it's that it's like there is cultish behavior around former President Trump, and so it's political suicide from the perspective of McCarthy to just shatter his narrowly crafted majority here, keeping all his fringe right together with his moderate right together with his center right. It might be hugely irresponsible just because a rational person can look at the indictment and say there were crimes committed. The Justice Department is not political here. And we could get into some of that, but we don't need to. We don't need to adjudicate it here. We're sort of more projecting on the political reaction still. Like you've got people like you said, like Bolton and Pompeo. They're out there. They are foreign policy specialists. who whether it's the National Security Council or advisor role, or whether it's Pompeo, I think was like head of the CIA for a while. He was a Congress member. So these guys are deep in the weeds on this, and they understand. Somewhere in the middle, like you said, there's a lot of people saying, look, I know he's not innocent. In other words, they're saying things like the system is what's broken,
right?
And that so Trump's behavior had to do with overclassification. It had to do with the records process being a little bit too archaic and not smooth enough to accommodate the fact that the president gets to keep what he wants to keep. But then there's other people that out there pretty far to the right, like you said, Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan, I don't want to disparage a sitting member of Congress, but it's uncomfortable to watch him. He's not a reasonable person. It's political theater, maybe a little bit more than that, but not much more. And he's just out there saying whatever comes to mind, and it's amateur hour when that guy's trying to defend, make his point. I hate to say it, but one last thing here, not to just ramble on here, but what a lot of folks are saying is like, yeah, what he did is illegal, probably, but it's selective enforcement, and you didn't enforce it with President Biden, and you didn't enforce it with Vice President Pence, and you didn't enforce it with Hillary Clinton, and that obviously is not how the legal system works. You don't get to say, oh, well, that guy didn't get a speeding ticket, so therefore I don't get a speeding ticket. Like, it just doesn't work that way. But that's not what they're about. They're not about the legal arguments. They're about the political team building and hype, and that's what's expressed. They're basically regurgitating back what the cult members that go to Trump rallies, the kind of sort of idiotic things that they're saying.
They're thinking really short term here.
Very short term.
Because I think Nikki Haley, she did a reversal. She first of all said this is not how justice should be pursued in our country. Then I think she had a chance to actually read the thing. And by Monday afternoon on Fox, she was like saying, if this indictment is true, President Trump was incredibly reckless with our national security. She is looking down the road. Other people are looking down the road and seeing it. Now, I think McCarthy is just banking on, well, I'll be able to slam them then because people won't remember what I said. They won't hold me to it. I can say whatever I want because, voters have short memories and they're stupid. I mean, that's basically their approach. But and DeSantis will say that too. I never said he was innocent. Tim Scott, the same thing. And you should expect better for someone like Tim Scott, but no, he's doing it. Mike Pence is kind of, maybe leaning towards a Romney type of position. Romney, for his position, is actually taking a hit with the approval polls in Utah for it. Murkowski says, well, we can't be totally dismissive of this complaint, right? I mean, you've got this variety, and then you've got people who maybe it's better. Maybe McConnell is even being responsible. I think it's a little cowardly, but he's being responsible by saying, I'm not going to comment on a criminal investigation, right? Stay out of it. That's not our branch of government. Stay out of it. When you have J.D. Vance trying to block the Department of Justice appointments and slow them down in protests, you can make an argument that that's obstruction. If he's trying to influence a decision to indict it, is he trying to get them to drop the case? That is a borderline crime. And they need to really, there needs to be some discussion of how serious this is, because it's kind of unprecedented. We haven't really seen this.
Yeah, I mean, we have grandstanding, and grandstanding could lead to worse. Yeah. And so we'll see. I know we're at the end of our time here, and we'll see as this thing plays out over time. As of right now, from the perspective of Republican reactions, I think it's just best to see it as what it is, which is electioneering beginning a little bit early for a presidential cycle and a congressional cycle, where the Republicans think that they have a good shot at keeping the House, taking the Senate, getting the presidency, and controlling all the branches of government. They don't want to mess it up. They're sticking with the horse that brought them to the race, or whatever the metaphor is.
We'll see how they react as this unfolds, but it is not going to unfold the way some of these Republicans want.
I don't think we can assume that just because race is taken into account, that necessarily creates an equal protection problem, because I understood that we looked at the history and traditions of the Constitution, at what the framers and the founders thought about. And when I drilled down to that level of analysis, it became clear to me that the framers themselves adopted the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment in a race-conscious way. That they were, in fact, trying to ensure that people who had been discriminated against, the freedmen, during the Reconstruction period, were actually brought equal to everyone else in the society. When there was a concern that the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have a constitutional foundation, that's when the 14th Amendment came into play.
All right. That takes us to a different topic, an old topic for me. I was in shock when I read the discussion of Allen versus Milligan. The decision from the Supreme Court. The two of the conservative justices joined with the three liberal justices to preserve what's left of the Voting Rights Act and over the map of Alabama, the congressional district map. We've discussed it on this show. Basically, the black vote in Alabama represents 35% of the vote. Democrats are anywhere from 40 to 45% of the vote. I believe Biden got 40% of the vote in the last election. There are 7 congressional districts, however, and only one Democratic representative going to Congress. So for 40% of the vote to only have 1 out of 7 representatives, we've talked about how this is gerrymandering in the extreme. Gerrymandering, of course, isn't necessarily unconstitutional, except when it's based on race, and particularly in a state like Alabama, which has disenfranchised the black vote in many different ways over the past century and a half. So So I just expected, because they basically refused a bunch of cases, that this case would be rejected and not heard and basically said, we don't have racism in this country anymore. We don't need the Voting Rights Act. Because there's no racism anymore, we can we can let the states do what they want. Well, the Supreme Court, with a decision by Justice Kavanaugh, it actually upheld the basis for it. Now, I don't want to. This isn't very broad. It's not going to end all gerrymandering. Ohio's gerrymandered to the hilt, but it's not all racially based, so it may not have a whole lot of effect in Ohio. But it will have an effect in other states. And basically, what the lawsuit was about is one of the Voting Rights Act tools is to basically make an argument that if we were to randomly have a computer randomly create districts just from population distributions, and 9 out of 10 of them, show that there would be contiguous districts of a particular minority ethnic grouping, in the South being black, and they come up with 2 or 3 districts that way that would either be, if not majority, competitive, and you randomly rarely come up with what's going on. There is discrimination, and you have to rewrite the map. And in this case, we've referred to it as the octopus district that basically reaches out tendrils into Montgomery, stretches it out to rural areas, up to Selma. I mean, it's just and basically tries to carve out one district with a lot of black votes, and then everything that's east of Montgomery gets split into 3 majority white districts. It is deliberately intended to split up the black vote and to basically, and the argument that they made is, well, we're not trying to oppress black people. We just want more Republicans in office, right? That's not a racist intent. And under the Voting Rights Act, that shouldn't have mattered, right? But and so the Supreme Court has reversed it, saying, nope, you need to redo this. So there will be at least one more competitive or possibly at least 2 more competitive, depending on how the Republicans decide to do it, or 2 at least majority black districts that almost guarantee Democrats in them, or maybe they'll have the 1 guaranteed and 2 competitive districts. In any case, they're not going to have their 6 to 7 majority most likely in the future. It's and the same thing is going to apply to the Snake District in Louisiana. And it's already getting application in Georgia. And so this could, 538 and Cook's political report is already changing their map, changing their ratings of races, and saying this increases the chances of Democrats retaking the House in 2024 based on what this is likely to have an impact. The only place where it might have an impact to give in favor of Republicans is possibly Illinois, except that gerrymandering isn't necessarily race-based. And so they would have to prove it, and maybe they could get 1 more seat out of it. But throughout the South, Florida, they broke up a classic black district in the north end there. That's probably going to have to be reversed because they deliberately did that. This is a huge decision. It won't affect Utah. We saw Utah basically breaks up Salt Lake City, which is Democratic, by having all 4 of the districts extend from the outer borders with tendrils extending into Salt Lake City and splitting it up into, where the majority are rural. And there's no ethnic grouping being broken up there. So the extreme gentrification there will survive this. But in the Deep South, this could have a big impact. It could have an impact of as many as 10 to 15 races potentially, but at minimum 6 or 7.
Yeah, again, thank you for the lay of the land here. I know this is a passion project for you, so it's great to hear you hit the ground running, because we'd talked about this in the past, and this was an unexpected legal outcome here from the Supreme Court, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm going to start from where you left off, which is that it is actually really significant. Even for people that aren't like living and breathing this stuff, it's really easy to see that even conservative Republican justices know there's a time to draw the line when it appears that these gerrymandering is linked directly to depriving a large, whatever the number is, 30%, about 1 in 3 members of the state of Alabama, the opportunity to have less. They're giving 1/7 of the representation when they are, whatever that works out to.
35% of the population.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's a big deal, and not just in Alabama, like you said. You said it could be up to 10 or 15 races, different district races around the South. Yeah.
Louisiana, for instance, they've got the Snake District that extends from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. That's going to come to an end.
Yeah, so I heard it said Alabama, South Carolina, Louisiana, Michigan, Georgia, Florida. And why does that matter so much? Because even picking up just 1 extra seat, as a reminder, the current balance of power in the House is 222 Republican, 213 Democrat. That means that 5 votes that go from R to D is a change of power. So if it's 5 states and it's only 1 district per state, that's enough. So it's clearly enough. And so now let's go to the specific case, because I think the specific case is interesting too, and that we, the idea here is that if it's truly the case that you can say prove that race was the reason that the map was drawn the way it was, then it would be a violation of Voting Rights Act. And so the question, this court has already shot down the pre-qualification elements of the Voting Rights Act, and the thought was that maybe they would shoot down other elements of the Voting Rights Act, including this one. And there's a hint of that in what Kavanaugh wrote, but I'll save that for a minute. Roberts basically said in the that there's no evidence that what the state of Alabama is claiming is true. What the state of Alabama said is that, hey, we got this computer model. We just plug it into the computer model. The computer model spits out, nope, no racism here. And so Roberts is saying, like, that doesn't hold water. It's not the case that you can just plug in some data into a computer and say, nope, no racism. And in fact, we're not even going to allow that to be the reason. Like, you didn't give us a reason, therefore you lose. You didn't give us a valid reason, therefore you lose this. There are people making the case that, like, sort of prima facie on the evidence, it looks like you did this. Prove you didn't. You can't prove you didn't do it. Then, we're not going to listen to what you have. And I think that that's a really interesting twist on this. Because Roberts is basically saying, like, we're not using computers to dive into this civil rights arena. And so to a certain extent, that's not my original thought. I've seen other people make this case that Roberts has a unique bias against this approach that Alabama chose to take. But the implications are still, like, solid, like you said earlier. That there are going to be repercussions in the other states. But what I was saying about Kavanaugh is that in his language, you got the impression that he's saying we can't. This isn't going to be this way forever. The Voting Rights Act isn't going to stand forever. We're not going to continue to defend this approach to how these things are drawn. We're gonna need another way to draw districts, and we don't want to be in the game of keeping score on race forever. Like, this isn't good. But then you got what I think I'll let you comment here after this. But it's Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is like, actually, I'm offended because it's been going on for too long. We do not need to be considering race anymore. Like, you guys you're not getting it right. This is a pretty clear-cut case of why are we even talking about race? We should not be talking about race. So Clarence Thomas is the extreme position between Roberts, Kavanaugh, and the others.
Yeah. Well, why? Look at the map. That's all you have to do. You say race isn't an issue. Look at the racial breakdowns of the communities and look at the ridiculous map. I mean, and then tell me race isn't an issue.
Totally.
It's I'm sorry. It may not be for the same reasons race was an issue, 3/4 of a century ago, but it doesn't matter. It's still about race. Anyway, it's I do think that Kavanaugh and Roberts are a little bit motivated because they've been on the defensive about the SCOTUS being perceived as a hack body that's just basically acting on behalf of the Republican Party. I think they felt like this this might be able to be a way to improve it. They also came out with a ruling that benefits Medicaid that was a little surprising too. So they're going to go back to reactionary rulings. They're not going to change anything. It's not going to change the fact that, quite frankly, I believe the doctor who says that Kavanaugh is a sexual predator. I'm sorry, I found her more convincing than him at the hearing, and it's great that he made this decision. He needs to account for what he did to the woman, but this is a big deal. I mean, this is a decision that they made that will have political ramifications for at least a decade, at least for this time.
For the whole census period, yeah.
It just it's just the point of this is that you can there's different ways. Maybe what we need is to talk about exactly what we're talking about. Does it have to have a racist intent in order for that to be the case? Well, the Voting Rights Act doesn't say that. The Voting Rights Act looked at impact. That was what it was there. It didn't look at what your intentions were. It didn't look at whether or not you were just trying to keep black people down, but because they were black. But it's in this case, it's because 9 out of 10 black people in this country vote Democrat.
You read my mind. That's exactly where I was going to go with this, is that it's proxy for their electoral success. If not, and it's the case that for as long as I remember, approximately 9 out of 10 Black people in America vote Democratic. So that it's a easy connection to make in the mind of Republican operatives. But then, so what's the remedy, right? So the remedy is, even though you want to manipulate the voting districts in a way that benefit your party, so the two-party system could be used against itself, so that there's one party with massive control over a state apparatus. We could look to California as a role model.
California is a great thing. I opposed it at the time, and I think there's flaws to it, but I think that needs to be the national model.
Absolutely.
An independent commission, bipartisan. I would say with maybe some third-party involvement. And
what's the term? Communities of interest? Is that the term, the principle?
Yeah. Yeah, communities of interest. It doesn't necessarily mean racial. It could be economic communities of interest. That's how our district here on the coast got preserved, because we said, they were going to merge us with Reading and Inland, and we, our advocates, made very clear that our community of interest is along the coast. It's the same type of industries, from tourism to fishing to the certain types of farming, certain types of culture, and the rest. Communities of interest that are kind of contiguous, and that's what they look for, and that's how they're basically created. And that could result in certain districts that have certain majority of ethnic groups, as long as it's not splitting a group up. If it's keeping them together, but not just to isolate them in one and split up the rest so that they're isolated, it can be fine. It's tricky, but again, when you have a relatively neutral bipartisan commission acting on it that are charged with this, that's what you got. So
I'm glad we're able to end on a high note. So thank you for bringing it home.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
I think my habit lately has been to make predictions about one of the subjects in our current show. So I'm going to do that again tonight. And so this is regarding Trump's indictment. And my take on this is, as serious analysts across the political spectrum have outlined over the last several days, the facts of the case appear to be compelling. Specifically, the conversations, communications, and actions of former President Trump and his staff member Walt Nuta reveal a conspiracy to obstruct his legal team from complying with the order to return the documents to the possession of National Archives and Records Administration. But given just how solid the evidence is in this case, it's in Trump's favor, as I said earlier, to ensure a long, drawn-out process with the intention of pushing the day of reckoning out beyond Election Day, which is Tuesday, November 4th of next year. It's coming around the corner. So my prediction is that until then, this case will be no more than a highly politicized rhetorical tool where both sides will be happy to employ and energize their base to encourage voter turnout, meaning this case will not result in Trump going to jail before the election, and it will not prevent him from becoming president if he's able to win the election.
Okay. I'm going to go off of our topics for today. The Fed met today, and they've held off further increase in the prime rate. They have been doing so aggressively over the past year in order to tame inflation. I'd say pretty ineffectively. I'm beginning to wonder if that whole concept is outdated. And in fact, the inflation is down to like about 5%. It was at 9% in June, and I think it's due to clearing up a lot of the supply chain issues. But what made it even as high as 5%? The biggest factor was the increase in housing costs. And although normally when you increase mortgage rates, the cost of housing goes down, what it's caused over this long term is for people to pull their houses off, potential sellers to pull their houses off the market. So there is lower supply, and which means that housing has actually gone up. So what you have here is an inflation rate that is higher because of the federal rate decreases. They are, federal rate increases. They have actually, they're so obsessed with inflation that at least for this period term, they are causing inflation. There is going to be pressure on them. They're saying maybe we're going to have to increase rates. We need to find another way to address inflation because that needs to stop. And I believe that Elizabeth Warren and others are going to start to really put pressure on the Fed to stop thinking of that as their primary goal when they're sending banks under and threatening the potential of a recession and all other things. At all costs we got to get inflation under control. That pressure is going to increase, and I don't think the Feds will be increasing the rates any higher anytime soon. Well, with that, we'll be back to discuss. I'm sure we'll be discussing the case and other things. Until next week, stay informed and stay engaged.